Hello, I'm Robert, science blogger and fact checker, and I help the very scared people who come to our Facebook group called Doomsday Debunked and who get scared by these various stories and by finding out what the facts are. So this time, this is running in a very pessimistic way in many of the news stories about it, but actually there's a lot of positive in this, and the psychologists say that actually if you want people to act and do things, then you want to talk about positive, and I'll also bring up little stories and things, because that is how you actually help people to actually work and move forward on this. And so you're just telling the facts as they are, but making sure not just always on the negative, which is what the journalists tend to do, and even emphasizing and exaggerating and even getting it wrong. And so just explain the way things are and making sure you can see the positive side of things. So this is a good graph that summarizes the situation. This is if we had continued in 2005 pledges, so we've improved a bit on that. And then if we go down, those are for our unconditional commitments, and then this is if we were to add in, for instance, if the Green Climate Fund was correctly funded, and we were to help the countries that have made these conditional, they have said that we can do it if we have extra funding, but we don't have the funding internally, then we can bring it back down, right down to there. And so this report is saying that this is the emissions gap down to, it's the UN emissions gap report is what I'm talking about. This is the 2 degrees C path. It's 1.8 and this is 1.5. So they tell us that the gap from there to there, and then you look at the gap from there to there, it's twice as much again. So that's triple what we've done already, and then this is another twice again. So that's where this kind 5 times increase and the 3 times increase in what we're doing. It's not an increase in investment. It's not an increase in cost. It's not an increase in the numbers of things you do. It's just an increase in the amount of carbon dioxide reduction we have to do. And as we'll see, it's very hopeful and very positive that we can actually do that. There's no reason why we can't do that. At the moment, our carbon dioxide emissions are increasing up to 2020, and that's expected because that's what our pledges are doing. So that's the big summary of the situation. And close that. And this is a more detailed. Yeah, it just helps a little bit to bring it up as a picture from the background. So this is looking at a little bit more detail, and so you can see that the conditional scenarios. You see these various tons. That's where gigatons of carbon dioxide, and that's equivalent carbon dioxide equivalent, and these different ranges. Yeah, I don't think it's showing much about that. So then what makes it very hopeful is that is that they make it sound like it's very difficult to get from there to there. But what you need to bear in mind is that transitioning to renewables is that all the power stations have reached the end of their life after about 40 years. And so you have to rebuild all the power stations anyway after 4 decades. And then the other things, like for instance the tankers, then they've reached the end of their life after 20 years. So it's not such a big deal as all that to go around replacing things. And then we have to do it rather faster than that. And then I think it makes it even easier than that is that most of the cost of the fossil fuels is ongoing. And even, it's a little thing, but it's quite big really. The US military spends $81 billion a year protecting its oil supplies. Or it could be up to $216 billion a year. That's quite a lot. It wouldn't need to do that. It wouldn't need to protect the oil supplies if it didn't need oil. So that's all that would be saved if the US transitioned completely to renewables. Then it would save between 81 billion and 216 billion a year, probably more like the higher figure. And that's between 1.2 and 3.2 trillion over 15 years. That's an awful lot of money that the US can save if it doesn't have to keep importing the oil. And that's just oil. There's coal as well. And so the fossil fuel plants are constantly having to supply the plants with the coal and the oil. And the whole thing about renewables is that they don't have to do that. And so the renewables, they have a big cost right at the beginning, and then after that, then it's a very low maintenance cost from then on. So, for instance, you may hear that China has built far too many coal power stations, and that seems kind of weird. Why would they do that? Because it doesn't mean that they're going to use lots more coal, because the power stations are actually already running at much less than capacity, because they have too many power stations already in China for the amount of electricity that is produced from coal. And if they had more power stations, then these are just more power stations that could run at even less than capacity. And so it seems a bonkers idea, but you've got to remember that building a coal power station doesn't cost very much. And then once you've built your power station, then all the cost is in the coal. And then if you're using less coal, you're still getting some income from the coal that you're burning. Even if so it's really a way of spreading the income out for the power stations over more power stations. That's basically what they're doing in China. And for some weird economic reason, this makes sense to them. Because it doesn't cost much to build these power stations, and then each one's going to get a little bit more economic income. And for some reason, they're doing that. It doesn't seem to make a lot of economic sense, but that's what they're doing. They're building more power stations, and it's partly because all the different areas are somewhat autonomous in their decisions about this as well. So but what happens with renewables? Once you've built your renewables, it's very low cost from then on, and then the actual cost of building the renewables is going down and down and down. And so I've got this down here. This is one of their graphs. As solar power has gone right down like that in just 18 years. That's from 0.4 down. It's about a fourfold decrease in just 18 years, and it's actually gone down about 100-fold since the very earliest solar panels. And really, we don't know quite how far it's going to go. It's probably going to halve again, and it's going to keep on going down. And each one is 2010, 2018, 2010, 2018, and these are other things. That's concentrating solar power. It's got to the point. So back then, they used to have all these concentrating solar power things, mirrors in deserts, because they cost less than the solar panels. Now the solar panels cost much less than them, and so these are becoming rather unusual. And these are much easier to build and better for wildlife and better in all respects. So this tends to be what everyone's building now. And this is wind. Wind's going down, not quite as fast, but still going down significantly. And this is just averaged over the world. In many areas, then the solar panel and the wind are actually costing less than the fossil fuel. They've gone below the bottom. And so when that happens, then we can make this transition, and it can go much faster, because what happens once you've got your renewables, then even your existing power stations, they become uneconomic. Already in the US, then even despite all Trump's attempts to keep it going, then coal-powered power stations just becoming uneconomic to keep running. It's costing too much. The maintenance of keeping the fossil fuel power stations going is less than the price you pay for the renewables, including that you have to build the whole new renewable power station from scratch. When that happens, then not only are you going to be replacing the fossil fuel ones when they reach the end of their life after 40 years, you replace them long before, because it's no longer economically sensible to keep your fossil fuel power stations going. So it is entirely possible that we have a very rapid change like this. There's no reason why it can't happen. this whole idea that we're stuck in this and it's going to be much hard. We've got 3 times more and we've got 5 times more, and you get the impression it's going to be 3 times harder or 5 times harder. But it could actually just come out very easily. And the real question really isn't that. The real question is, have we reached, at what point does it make sense to do a very rapid build-out of the renewables? It already would make economic sense now. If we were stuck at renewables, this is the lowest it's going to go, then it would make economic sense to do it right away, to build as many renewable plants as we can right away, because we're going to save money on the fossil fuel. But the renewables are probably going to halve again, and maybe quite a bit more after that. It's very hard to know where the technology is going, but we can already see improvements, ways that we can improve that we haven't done yet. We know in the laboratory, we know it from the science, we know it can be done. It just needs to actually do it. So they are going to go down a fair bit still. But so anyway, that's the idea of Bernie Sanders' idea, is that he's going to build lots and lots of renewables. I've got the figures there. His total thing is 16 trillion Green New Deal. That's got lots of other stuff. That includes electric vehicles and massive exchange of electric vehicles and public transport, electrified public transport. And he has a whole impetus and incentive for research into new batteries, new battery technology, and other things like that. Because there are lots of new ideas for batteries that would be better than lithium ion. Lithium air is one example that has a possibility of the battery of containing as much power as similar to gasoline. The amount of power you can fit into the same amount of space and same amount of mass. So there are lots of research ideas, and some are really quite close, and some are a little bit more distant. He's saying put a massive investment into those, and that's and he says that's going to pay off as well. And so it's very interesting. He got really slammed a bit by people who didn't really understand what he was saying very well. But certainly for the renewables, then so his renewables, then for the first, I think, 15 years, then they pay themselves. The government would pay out a vast amount on building all these renewable power stations. But just as if a private investor who was happened to be wealthy enough, would say, I'm going to spend $1 billion on new renewable power stations, then you get your money back with a profit. So he's saying the government can do that. And these would be government-owned power stations. They would then pay themselves back to the government. And then at the end of the payment period, once they're completely paid back, instead of taking a cut like a private company would do, you would have very low cost, almost free energy after that, which would be a great stimulus. And then you have all the jobs from these power stations. So whether it is the right time to do that, it certainly is it makes much more sense than you would think, and that would be a very rapid transition. That would be much faster than that. If everyone did his, then it's going down like that. His one's going down like he's got zero emissions by 2030. So that's even faster. Transition from 2020. In the UK we're going to 2050, and the Labour Party here, they did a kind of Green New Deal, but it's not nearly as ambitious as Bernie Sanders' idea. So it's very. So I'm not saying that the US should do that. I'm saying it's a very interesting idea, which I think deserves being looked at more closely than it has been, and that it is really interesting to look at this and say, are we at this stage where we should have a massive renewables build out? And if we are, then it could literally go down like that. It's not impossible that as the renewables, especially with it halving again, we're certainly not limited to this, to this. It's very possible. So that's the positive side of all this. And so they talk about this, but they don't talk about it very much. And so I just tried to say a little bit more about that. And there are quite a lot of challenges. To go all the way down to zero by 2030, then you have a big problem because it's only a decade for your electric vehicles. Because if we're really going all the way down to zero, we're going quite a long way down because of these very rapid renewables. but because you then have to, the vehicle's average age takes you to 2035, and so if you just did it by selling mainly new vehicles, then it's later than that. 2040 is well feasible with rapid stimulus of renewables and just the ordinary electric vehicles rollout. But if you want to get to 2030 like he does, then you have to this buyback of cars and really encourage people to buy lots and lots of electric vehicles, and then you can get there to 2030 and various other things. So that's quite ambitious. 2050 is it's not nearly as hard as people think. It is not mainly because of this huge drop in the cost of renewables, which wasn't expected. The reduction in the price of renewables has been far more than anyone would have thought back in 2015 even. So if you look back here, in certainly 2010, they wouldn't have expected that you'd have reduced quite that much in just 8 years. You'd have had a fourfold reduction. That's a lot in 8 years. So there are quite a lot that's quite promising. Now this was Zeke Oswald. This shows this is not taking account of negative emissions. So this is the carbon dioxide, and if we had started if we'd done just by reducing the amount that we emit, then this is what we would have had by if we'd started in 2000. It'd been really quite easy, and then it's getting steeper and steeper. And then if we delay it all the way to there, it's almost vertical. You see, if we delay it all the way to 2025, 20, late 2020s. So we do. So now, did I say China? I don't think I've got to that yet. So China, yes. So if we can manage to even reduce slightly there, then that makes it much easier for the reduction after that. But this steep path is definitely possible. That's the pathway to 1.5 degrees C. Now, the actual one that if you actually go and look at the one that the IPCC did, it's a little bit gentler. It's hard to tell because they don't actually give this. I haven't got the years. Yes, 2060. It's a slightly, but slightly is different scale. Hard to really compare that. But what they have, they've got this brown area at the bottom, and this is negative emissions through reforestation and through agriculture changes and things like land use change. And this is an example. This was almost a desert, and then in 1995, in 2009, then that's what it looked like. That's taking a lot of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Not only that, it's once you've got all these trees and the grassland, this is also constantly taking a somewhat small amount of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere just by being there and by growing, and it enriches and bits of it get into the ground. And so that's partly because as the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing, then the amount of carbon dioxide that the trees take up is increasing, and the leaf area is increasing with the increasing carbon dioxide. So if you add some more forest and some more grassland, then you've got an area that is constantly taking up a little bit more as the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up. And then you also have things like peat, which is constantly taking in carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So that's that. But and this is that's the I'm not going to that. Where did I explain? Oh yes, that's them talking about why do we not invest an equal amount or more? And the 2018 report actually said that as well. That the 2018 report, a little paragraph, not much shared, that if the low end, so if you're talking about very huge, if you have big overshoot and then a lot of negative emissions, then that is one matter. But the amount that we would need, if just a little bit of extra help on our way to 1.5C, then this is these are pathways with either reducing energy demand, so we can reduce energy demand by a huge amount, we've done a big reduction in energy demand in the UK by switching to LED lighting. People don't go and buy twice as many lights or 10 times as many lights if you switch to more efficient lighting. And it's the same if you insulate your house, so it's zero emission houses, and people don't increase the temperature inside to compensate and start living at 40 degrees centigrade or something like that. They just use less energy. And if you have lower energy fridges, then they won't buy 3 fridges because the fridge is using less power. So reducing the energy consumption is a big way of helping. Another big way that helps is through, they talk about rapid shifts to sustainable food consumption. That's reducing food waste. So we waste an awful lot of food. And if we can waste less food, and this is something you can do in yourself, in your own life, if you just check you don't waste much of the food that you buy. Don't buy too much food. Don't let it go mouldy in the fridge. And you're doing a little bit to help the world there. This actually makes it a much easier scenario if everyone does that. And then if supermarkets do that, and then if farmers in the poorer countries, then they have problems not having refrigerated lorries. And so the various things being done now to help the poor countries, in India for instance, to help them finance with refrigerated lorries so they don't lose maybe 40% of their produce from their farm, because they take it to the market and it's rotted before it gets there, because they have a very long journey, maybe 100 miles or a couple of hundred miles in an unrefrigerated lorry. And this sort of stuff is going on at the moment. And so lots of quite little things we can do, seem little but they're very important. And that all fits into this brown area down there, and reducing the food waste, and that can make it very, very much easier. And so now I was just going to talk a little bit about China and how it's producing all these coal plants it doesn't need. And so that seems to be to do with the trade war, but they're expected in the they expected to come up with a pledge in 2020. They already said in 2019 they're going to come up with a pledge in 2020, because that's going to be a pledge to zero emissions by the end of the century, by sometime in the second half of the century. We don't know when. They haven't produced this pledge yet. And so that's the thing to bear in mind again with this graph. So this is a little bit steeper than it needs to be because you've got negative emissions. And then you've got to remember with this graph that you've got these today, and then the Paris Commitment, the 2025 and 2030, and each time there's going to be a reduction. And we want, ideally we want steep reductions straight away. And it's certainly entirely possible. The China, with its big build out of renewables already, it might give us quite a dramatic reduction pledge there. It's certainly feasible for it to do that. And they claim they're going to be able to have a reduction pledge which is very big for China, to get down to zero emissions by the end of the century. If we look at what the other parts of the world are doing, then this is Europe, and we're actually decreasing not too badly. I mean, it's not nearly enough, but it's for 1.5 degrees C, but we're doing not too badly. Even the US is reducing as well, and quite significantly. And but India is increasing, and China is increasing. And this is not everyone, this is just some of the big emitters. And you can see China sort of leveled off, down a bit, now it's going up again. But it's probably peaked or close to, it is pledged to peak by 2030. It is very likely that it's going to peak in the early 2020s, even without a big increase in pledge. And so at some point, we are going to start reducing emissions overall. India, I mean, that's increasing. It's going to, it's got its various renewable policies as well, and we certainly could see in the 2020s. We expect the emissions to be going down. The real question is when in the 2020s it's going to happen, early on or towards the end. It's definitely going to happen. We're not going to be constant CO2 emissions right through to the end of the 2020s. At some point we're going down, and the big question is, do we do it early? And so that's about the China and the renewables. uh, yeah, so this we can do a lot of this reforestation, and the other things we can do. There's carbon capture and storage. So steel and cement factories, they produce a lot of carbon dioxide, and the ways of reducing the amount they produce and of capturing what they produce. The steel plant in Abu Dhabi already capturing CO2. We can also burn the stubble from crop residues in power plants rather than burning them in the fields, and other various crop residues. And we can also burn the residues from forestry, where you cut down trees and I've got forestry up the back where I am, and they just kind of trim off all the branches and things, and those trimmings can all be burnt as biofuels, or you can leave them to rot into the ground and so on. But that's the idea of using, especially if the trees are moved and then they're trimmed somewhere else, then that's in the sawmill where lots of bits left over, and those offcuts, then they can also be burnt and then the carbon dioxide captured. And if you do that, then that's all carbon negative. That all counts in that brown area that's reducing. So there's lots going on. There's the renewables. So it's not like 3 times harder or 5 times harder. And it could easily be that we actually have a stimulus to jobs by increasing the falling costs of clean energy, and it's not enough, but it makes worst case outcomes far less likely, so like 3 or above. But this is something we can stimulate, and we can do that without having to incur huge costs. We have this built out anyway naturally from replacement of things, and then it actually makes sense. The main issue here really would be the stranded assets which the oil companies have. So they may have to look a little bit carefully, and they already are to some extent, that they don't build too many new things that would, like prospecting for lots and lots of new oil wells, and then maybe we don't need that oil, or not for a long time. So that's that. So now this is about how I recommend you have listened to this video. It's a psychologist who talks about, but we need to motivate ourselves with positive messages, and this is something that I try to do, and not just focus on what's going wrong, and to move us in the direction of doing something about all this, and we already are, but in a much more positive way. And so some of the other, China is one of the. China is very crucial to what's going to happen in the future for the next decade. It'd be quite hard if China stays up high with high emissions, and especially if it hadn't done it. What it did do, it's done a massive amount of these renewables already. If it hadn't done that, we'd have been really quite difficult. And the more that China acting very quickly is going to help us, and the more quickly it does, the easier it is for everyone else, because it is such a big amount of the total emissions. Go back, look up at that thing. These are the carbon dioxide emissions from China, compared with it's a quite high percentage of the total emissions from the entire world. So it's going to be quite difficult if they stay up, but hopefully they're going to come down quite quickly. That'll make it easier for the rest. It's not sort of impossible if they stay up a little bit longer, but the sooner they come down, the easier it is for everyone to stay within 1.5 C. I just want to say, and yes, and then the so that's China is one of the worst affected. The US is also very much affected, and I was going to explain up here. Yes, I've forgotten about that. So we'll go back to Florida. Where's Florida? Further down. Yes. So this is maybe a little bit cheeky, but this is Trump's Mar-a-Lago. Have I said it right? His place in Florida, where this is what it would look like. The thing is, with a very extreme sea level, we're not expecting that much, but that's very extreme sea level rise. But the thing is that the Florida is land is that you can't use sea defences to stop this in Florida, because it's built on porous limestone, and this would just be the highest sort of flood, storm tides and so on. But he will have no way to stop the sea from flooding in. if he gets high storm surges. And so so the US is quite strange. The US is one of the worst affected. It's quite strange. I think extraterrestrials looking at us would be a little bemused that the US would be one of the countries to want to leave the Paris Agreement, because they're amongst the most affected. And China is also one of the most affected, and that's why it's very unlikely that China would will kind of. It's very likely that they will actually have stronger commitments. I think part of it is that the Chinese president stays in power for a long, long time, and he will actually personally be in power when things start going wrong, if he doesn't act upon it. And and so this is looking. So Florida is that is the actual extreme is much less than that, even if we kept right up at 3 degrees C. But as we saw there, we're not going up at 4.9 degrees C. We're not going that way. But they've reduced the estimate now in the most recent report earlier this year. It's 1.2 for the highest range for the extreme scenario, for the business as usual probably kind of thing. And people think a lot about how they often say that Bangladesh is going to lose a lot of land. Well, it is losing land because of the rising seas, but it's also gaining land at the same time. And the reason is that and these are areas where it can potentially it can reclaim all that land, including parts that are actually sea at the moment. This is potential for reclamation in Bangladesh, and it's getting a rather promising situation. It's getting quite a lot of silt coming down the rivers because of the very high glaciers melting. This won't go on for very long, for all the way through to the end of the century. But at the moment, the glaciers in the Himalayas, they're melting more than they normally would, and so they're producing more water. And so that's sending more silt down into the sea, and this is creating new islands. So Bangladesh has got quite a good opportunity at the moment to kind of encourage that process along a little bit and gain a little bit of extra land from silt that's coming down the ocean, down the rivers. And Bangladesh, it's losing some land, but it's also gaining some land. And the people in Bangladesh are saying that the people outside it, the kind of international experts who sort of say, you're going to lose a lot of land in Bangladesh, and they say, wait a minute, look at all this silt and look at all this reclamation possibility. It's not so clear, and it's actually possible that Bangladesh might actually gain land. And unlike Florida, then it's mud, and seawalls work, and you've got silt, and you can keep it. You can trap the silt, and you can, if necessary, you can do like the dikes, like Netherlands. If they had lots of money, then they could just make polder systems like Netherlands and create lots of new land. Because they're very similar to the Netherlands, and the Netherlands did its original polders with very low technology centuries ago, and Bangladesh doesn't need sort of like huge expensive things to start. So even though it's a poor country, it can do a fair bit of land reclamation, and the Green Climate Fund would actually help with that. So anyway. So yes. So I was saying that China is one of the most. China has got very good incentives. So has the US, and if not in 2020, then by 2024, then surely, then whoever is president then will start thinking, oh, this makes sense, But if not, then they're not the top. They're not the top emitter, and although they are quite a lot, above even the EU, but China is top. And they have to kind of and the US is going down, and some areas like California already is 1.5 C compatible, like the UK. They target zero emissions by 2050 because it has a fair bit of autonomy as a separate state. It can actually set a zero emissions target, and it has. So lots going on, lots of positive stuff's going on, and so. Yes, so as I was saying, he talked about these stories, like did I tell you about the floating? I was meaning to tell you the floating farms of Bangladesh, and how they're using saltwater farms to keep shrimp and crabs instead of what they had before, and other ones that are in the rivers. And lots of ingenious, Bangladesh is obviously very ingenious, and they're doing all sorts of extraordinary things there. Same for the Indians, they're very ingenious. They've got lots of very clever projects going on in India, adapting and making sure they make best use of the water and so on. And so there's loads of stuff like that going on. And I've got that somewhere here. If I go up to just below, look in the page, just below that. There we are. No, that's. Oh yes, Finland is headed for zero emissions by 2035. Where did I have it? Oh, maybe I've got it in here. Right, so what I'm looking for... Oh yes, here we are. Videos just below that video. So you go to that video on my page, just below it. I've got loads of other videos of loads of wonderful, good things that are going on in the world. And you can use that if you're feeling depressed and you read lots of miserable, gloomy, depressed, lost their hope type of journalist stories, then have a watch of some of these videos and some of the things people are doing, and undaunted. They're just going ahead and planting trees and reversing the desertification, not listening to all the naysayers, just going ahead and doing it, and it's succeeding. And there's a massive reforestation going on in the world, and over Asia and over Europe and North America, then forests are growing. But in Africa and South America, they're still reducing, but it's actually very hopeful. Even there, there's lots of projects going in the other direction, so they're doing both at once. They can turn around. I think it's going to turn around in the next decade or so, that in South America and South Africa, they'll be reforesting just like the rest of the world is. A big project's there to do that. And they're getting much more efficient at their agriculture, so there's less pressure on the forests. But it's not. There's a study, for instance, for Brazil that says that by the mid-2020s, then it's just a very middle of the road economic model of Brazil, and the agriculture improving not very hugely, and just steadily improving. Then they think by mid-2020s, then they will no longer have the need for the farmers to cut down the forests, the tropical rainforest. No longer the economic, and they will actually be having more the other kind of problem of lots of abandoned land because the agriculture is getting more efficient, and those could be used for reforestation. So yes, have a read of some of these if you're feeling depressed, and it's very positive stories, lots of wonderful positive stories there. And then there's all this about seaweed, that people are growing seaweed now, and that is very artificial glaciers in. Yeah, and that is, I think I mentioned it. This was the idea of reducing by using refrigeration in the Punjab. Then they're hugely reducing the food waste, and that's a big effect on the environment. It makes a big difference by having a cold chain, by having a refrigerated lorry. What's this? Bangladesh floating farms. I already talked about that. And then all these conservation projects to help with with wild animals and create biodiversity and things, helping with the corals, fish, and then solar farms. These China's vast floating solar farms, and it's the first solar farm at sea. We are very familiar with offshore wind now, but we don't have much offshore solar. But the sea is a vast area to cover with solar panels. And this is very useful. For instance, Singapore is a quite likely early adopter of this, because it's a very built up and there's not much place to put solar panels on land except on top of buildings and things, but you can put them out at sea. And this is about, this is a floating, a reduced cost, floating wind turbines in very deep sea that you can do. This is about mines, using a mine as a kind of battery, like for mining, they used to be used for mining minerals or something. Then you can use water pumped up from one mine shaft to another, one gallery to another, as a kind of battery, and then let it out. You get more than 80% round trip efficiency, and that's a low cost way of balancing renewables. And electric planes, and that's a new thing that's coming in, and this is various ways of using carbon dioxide to carbon mineralization, you can actually make carbon dioxide into a product, and that could mean actually, at the moment it's very expensive to upgrade fossil fuel, or would later be biofuel plants, to add carbon dioxide sequestration. But if you can make it into a product, then you can actually make a profit out of the carbon dioxide, which is just waste at the moment. And so these are various ways that you could do that. And the ocean cleanup. So anyway, that's a few positive stories to go and to end with it, as that psychologist was saying. And then there's some kind of personal stories there that you can have a little read about, and sometimes it's just one person can make a big difference sometimes in what they do. So start make a forest start happening or something. And some people and then I've got this whole thing about talk about that separately, about various simple lifetime changes you can do. And if you sometimes some parents, they wonder, they think, should I bring children into this world? Try and think about it positively. Your children can be the first zero carbon generation, and they can help bring it about. And that's not by far into the future. In Finland, they think they're going to have it by 2035. So someone who's just been born in Finland now, when they're 15, then they'll be carbon zero, and beyond that, carbon negative. So they'll be the first carbon negative generation. And this we can do. And we can grow enough food for everyone. I've talked about in other videos. I want to keep these very short, so hope that helps a little bit with this thing. Just I haven't really said anything different from what the report is. What I said is just what the report said, but I've just given the positive side of it, which helps you to put it in context and explain the whole bit about the renewables, and about how it's actually quite easy. It's entirely possible that because of the way that the renewables, so to sum up the central message, the way the renewables, it's a high upfront cost, but that's getting less and less all the time. And then after you've done that, you don't have to have oil tankers bring oil all the way to your renewable power station. You don't have to defend the oil tankers against attacks, or protect the people producing the oil, and you don't have to keep making these new oil tankers. You don't have to buying oil all the time. And same for coal and gas. And there's these ongoing costs that you just don't have with renewables. And it's very secure, because you're not depending on once you've got a solar power plant and you keep it maintained, you don't have any imports that you're dependent on anymore in order to keep your power systems working. So lots of benefits to having renewables. Indeed, that alone would seem to be quite a benefit by itself, that you're not dependent on having oils coming from other countries to and all this support chain and everything. And anyway, so hopefully that's helped a little bit.